Hey, Black Hat. Welcome to my session. The decaying corpse of the hardware security market gives life to cloud native and cloud delivered infrastructure security. My name is Jeff Wilson, and I am the chief analyst for infrastructure security at Omdia. And I was challenged to think of the longest session title I could, and I think I met that challenge. Um, Actually, no, I was inspired, as you'll see later, by an age-old, simple but very funny bit from Monty Python, and we'll talk about it when we get there. So I think I skipped the agenda because honestly, I think there's enough in the title to really figure out what it is that we're going to be talking about here. So I'll start with this thought. The network perimeter had a good run, right? You can't scroll through a social media feed, check LinkedIn, look at the news without hearing something about kind of the new reality for remote work. Inside the industry, the complete disappearance of the network perimeter and the rise of things like SASE and zero trust network access. And those are all interesting, useful architectures, technologies, but they have significant implications on kind of the existing hardware and infrastructure that's used to securely connect users and devices to the networks and data that they need. So I sort of jokingly say the network perimeter had a good run, 1974 to 2020. In reality, since the mid 90s, the network perimeter has been slowly eroding because of the increased use of the internet and then use of VPNs over the internet to sort of extend secure connectivity to public infrastructure. And then all that has transpired since then, and in particular, the rise of the cloud. But we went from the mid 70s to the very first local area, commercially available local area network technologies, to the beginnings of remote access, IPsec and SSL VPNs. In the early 2010s, we saw the rise of per app VPNs and the notion of securely connecting enterprise mobile devices and IoT to where we are now it's 2021, but really 2020. For reasons that we will discuss, was the year that really kind of signaled a massive change in the way things are happening. The IT transformation and the move to the cloud are changing network, application, and data access patterns significantly and changing them forever. So, before the pandemic, what was happening? Certainly we saw a key series of drivers that impacted the purchase and deployment of all types of security technology, and I break it down into really four key trends. One is IT transformation, right? The move to public cloud infrastructure for applications, for data, for entire portions of IT infrastructure and network infrastructure. This transformation affects everything, and it absolutely affects security, and to some degree will be partially enabled by security technology. So that's one. You can never talk about what drives investment in, purchases of, and deployment of security solutions without talking about the threats themselves. And without a doubt, the evolution of threats has impacted greatly, how people think about and purchase security solutions and how they deploy and use them. Consolidation of security platforms and vendors to reduce complexity. So, over the last 25 years or so, most companies who have been in business that long have been slowly building up IT infrastructure. They have a hodgepodge of vendors, platforms, management consoles, technologies. It's not all stitched together. Really, I mark the Target breach as a sort of bellwether moment that changed the C-level thinking on this issue and started companies down the path of investigating platforms. Platforms for the endpoint, platforms for the network, platforms for the cloud, and then sort of Uber platforms for SecOps management and visibility. To sort of erase all of the blind spots between these individual technologies that have been purchased and rolled out. And then finally, you can't really talk about anything in IT, in networking, and certainly in security without talking about the impact of the wide-scale rollout of mobile devices and IoT. And how this fundamentally changes because it's no longer, individual to computer. It's, lots of machine to machine conversations, lots of things happening when no one's even paying attention or no human beings are involved, and just a tremendous increase in the number and type and diversity of devices connected to infrastructure. So those are the things that we think really move purchases. When we survey buyers about the barriers to making new investments in security technology, typically the responses are things like they're very expensive. There's a lack of innovation, and in particular, the innovation around consolidating platforms and technology so things work together better. Lack of standards-based or really interoperable solutions as folks try to build platforms, but still exist in a multi-vendor environment. I mean, the most mainstream enterprises are not trying to get down to one vendor in infrastructure security, but they're trying to get from 20 to maybe 5. Poor management platform, lack of orchestration and automation. A lot of these investment barriers are being worked on significantly for security technology that is cloud native and cloud first. Things like, certainly not complexity, as we'll talk about, but cloud requires orchestration and automation, and that same orchestration and automation can be applied to security. There are sort of de facto standards being forced by the cloud. If you're using AWS, folks are tied to the networking and infrastructure solutions that are part of AWS, and then all the security solutions have to follow suit. So those barriers didn't go away. And I wouldn't even say because of the pandemic, the investment drivers are changed. If anything, they just accelerated. So the pandemic happened. We're a year and a couple months. We've talked... as an industry, we've talked about this to death. I'm not going to dwell on this for very long, but we have seen in our industry and outside of it massive changes in the way people live and work. And those changes have far-reaching implications for things like infrastructure security. And, the initial thought was, well, that's it, right? Everything's going to the cloud. Everyone's going to move to cloud-delivered solutions, including security. And the hardware market is for security and frankly, for lots of different IT technologies is going to collapse instantly. We had reports of, say, a large bank whose current VPN license was for 20,000 concurrent users with a request for their provider of that technology to scale that to 200,000 or 300,000 users over the course of 2 or 3 weeks. How can you do that except for in the cloud with cloud delivered or cloud native solutions? A lot of people ran up against that wall in the last year and a half trying to figure out exactly how you could deliver secure connectivity to people spread all over the world, in a short amount of time, or pop-up solutions for COVID testing, drive up COVID testing, where there still needs to be access to medical records that need to be secure in the United States, HIPAA compliant. Tremendous amount of challenges that pushed even farther towards more flexibility, more elasticity, more need for a platform level view, faster transformation of IT to the cloud. So in a post-pandemic world, the first fundamental principle is that life is digital. A lot of people learned this if they weren't fully immersed in the digital world, if they had never worked at home, if their kids had never, done any kind of homeschooling or taken time off of in-person school. If you hadn't watched everything available on Netflix already, every part of our life over the last year and a half became significantly more digital. And in a digital world, the digital world that we're in now in 2021, cloud is absolutely the center of IT. Borders are effectively gone. You need to be able to extend connectivity and security to anyone or anything anywhere. Network traffic exploded. So, underpinning all of this is just a massive demand for more capacity. The locations required for that capacity may have shifted a little bit, but the demand just went up. Security has to follow networking, data, users, and devices to where they are. And I think this is a lot of why the topic of zero trust in general and the move towards SASE architectures, which is an attempt to implement zero trust along with some networking technologies, became so hot in the last year, because it removes the concept of location and what that says about your access privileges, what you can and can't do from the picture, and just said, we're going to flip this around from a from a blacklist model of security in general to a whitelist model, which is my simplified view of how zero trust works. So then it doesn't matter where someone is connecting, as long as they have zero trust principles applied, they can connect from anywhere. And then, on the adversary side, so that's all the things that a CISO or an IT organization can monitor, manage, and control. On the adversary side, they do what they always do, which is they adjust strategy. They take advantage of chaos. They make new opportunities that exist because people are remote, because we're so dependent on hospitals and testing and vaccines and vaccine rollouts. So whatever little tears in comfort and normalcy the attackers can take advantage of, they did. And so we saw that remain the case. And, the threats and the risks are changing. Now we have to think about things like, and we'll talk about what this means for the hardware market, but what happens when you send your CFO home and you're handling high-level public reporting CFO duties for a merger or an acquisition or an IPO or just quarterly financial publishing, and your CFO is having to do that from home. Is the home environment as secure as the in-office network environment? We saw lots of ad hoc networks pop up. We learned that there are lots of cloud infrastructure and application vulnerabilities, supply chain attacks that allow a foothold to not just attack one company, but anyone who has adopted the technology that's part of that supply chain popped up. Technology complexity is growing. That's one issue with the cloud is, while someday it will be nice to have everyone standardized around cloud infrastructure and cloud technology, for now, the complexity is significantly higher than in your own owned infrastructure, and not helped by the fact that folks like Amazon and Microsoft and Google are constantly innovating and adding features to their base cloud services at an alarming rate. And all of those features affect how you can deploy cloud infrastructure and then how you secure it. The skills shortage is growing. We need more people, not less. There's more traffic, more to secure. The vendor landscape is unstable. We've seen a lot of major vendors go into private equity ownership or, sort of change hands or enter or leave markets. Misconfigurations. This is, one of my favorites. There was a recent survey released that said, the biggest source of, exploitable vulnerabilities in the cloud come from, guess what? Misconfigurations and not being able to monitor and manage cloud configurations so that, configuration management in the cloud becomes an essential security capability or tool. And it's something that a lot of folks don't have a technology solution for yet. And this infrastructure transformation creates seams in your environment, and those seams are the seams that are most likely to be exploited by attackers. So, cloud migration is inevitable. Old models for rolling out security must die, inevitably will die. It wouldn't be such a risk for cybersecurity if the benefits of the cloud weren't so diametrically opposed to security. Why do people like the cloud? Because you can move quickly. You can update applications on the fly. The development process and the rollout process become one thing. You can bounce around from cloud provider to cloud provider to take advantage of the lowest cost. There are lots of advantages, business advantages, time advantages in the cloud that just make life worse for security professionals. So the models for developing and deploying security as we move to the cloud must change. People have been very comfortably building walls around the perimeters, around their headquarters, branch offices, remote offices, with traditional network security technologies, firewalls, and intrusion prevention, and then all of the things that have been layered onto those. But now there's time for a revolutionary change in how that's done. And the vendor landscape is going to change too. For security, you're typically comfortable with and used to working with well-known networking vendors that have security solutions, or well-known security vendors that have been around for a while playing in one of the core platform areas. Well-known managed security service providers. But when you move into the cloud, you start to see cloud-focused technology vendors, cloud providers with overlapping technology offerings for security, MSSPs who are pushing out to the edge and re-architecting their infrastructure to better deliver things like SASE and zero trust network access. And then, brand new security vendors that are squarely focused on the cloud. And so you have this move towards SASE for secure connectivity of users and devices, regardless of where they are. And then the edge of the networks that you're connecting to getting closer to you, getting richer and more, more feature rich and offering more, potential services and solutions. But who are the vendors that are going to be the trusted partners in that space? It's up in the air right now. There are some obvious contenders, but there are also probably going to be some new faces. So you have to be prepared for, if you're a vendor in this space, how do you tell the story about how you deliver solutions in this new reality? And if you're a buyer, you need to know that your trusted security vendor, possibly for the last 15 or 20 years, might be changing in the next year or two. As you figure out who it is you can really trust to deliver this revolutionary change in experience from old owned infrastructure and into the cloud. So, hardware security vendors, the estimates for the value of various markets are vary a lot, but let's just say, the hardware firewall market's a $10 billion market annually, plus or minus, right now. It's one of the largest individual markets in enterprise security solutions, one of the most well-established and well-understood. The leading vendors in that space are leading vendors overall, and for the most part do much more than just deliver hardware firewalls, but that's their bread and butter. And what they're screaming, and what they started screaming in 2020 is, I'm not dead yet. Like the world has pronounced us over, and this has happened before. I think I'll go for a walk. And in fact, in 2020, most projections for the hardware market were low. Most vendors who sell hardware, core hardware security solutions, beat their expectations for 2020, which at the beginning of the pandemic, with the looming potential of a global pandemic, shocked everyone, I think. It was for a lot of reasons. If you are doing firewall-based, SSL VPN remote access for your users, and you need to scale that up 10x over the course of a month, some people just had to invest in more hardware in order to scale quickly so that they could get there. When there is significantly more network traffic overall going through carriers and cloud providers, and whether it's residential or commercial traffic, it still drives the need for more security processing capacity. So just because for a lot of people there was a big pause in business, doesn't mean that the networks that support business around the globe got a break last year. They didn't get a break. They worked harder last year, those networks did, that infrastructure did, than ever before, and became even more critical. So there was this short-term reinvigoration of even some slower markets. IPS had a couple of blowout quarters that the IPS market hadn't seen for a while, precisely because there were some major infrastructure upgrades that had to happen. And this is when you look globally across everyone who consumes security technology, not just enterprises. Some of the spend is shifting, right? If you're moving from owned hardware security infrastructure on your sites to cloud delivered security from someone who offers that person has to make significant investments to scale up their infrastructure so that they can deliver service to you. So the hardware might not be on your edge anymore. You might not own it, but somewhere there's hardware and software that's running, the capability for you to increase your number of remote users by tenfold, in a month or two. That has to happen somewhere. So the security vendors at the end of 2020 in the core networking and network security hardware space were thinking, I'm not dead yet. I feel fine. I think I'll go for a walk. But there is a cold reality coming for most of them. So if we look at this by the numbers, 2019, 2020, looking at total revenue for the top 4 vendors in the network security space, and with the significant portion of their revenue coming from hardware, most of them beat their 2020 expectations. Several of them managed double-digit year-over-year growth in 2020. All doing between $1 and $2 billion themselves just in hardware network security in a market that was pronounced dead because everybody's moving to the cloud and SASE. Clearly, that's not the case. At least it wasn't in 2020. So what's driving the growth? As I said, if you shift from rolling out your own infrastructure to moving to cloud delivered services, there's hardware somewhere. In some cases, cloud delivered services are delivered on common cloud infrastructure platforms. In other cases, they require high-end, expensive, specialized, high-performance hardware security solutions that are just in the service provider's environment, not yours. And so the high-end products, over $30,000 and products in the over $150,000 range for firewalls are growing. And then in the virtual space, so these are still product-based solutions, virtual appliances for network security for firewall, also showing a massive growth. Historically, virtual firewalls had accounted for maybe somewhere between 5 and 8% of a typical firewall vendor's revenue. In some cases last year, we saw as much as 15 or 20% of revenue coming from virtual solutions. And that's just simply about moving the perimeter, moving the boundary to wherever the VM is installed and not just wherever your physical hardware appliance is on your prem. And, SaaS is becoming dominant in legacy and in new markets that were SaaS first, obviously. But here we're looking at revenue for traditional, what we call content security solutions, but think of it as secure web gateways and mail security. And then, a few other things. Over the years, since, this shift towards SaaS has already, started. Appliances and software in 2019 made up just under 50% of the market. That's creeping down to 20% by 2025, and you can see the big change that happens, the knee in the curve in 2020. If you look at the financial reporting from some of the SaaS first and SaaS only cloud delivered security vendors, they've had great years, but they're not the only ones who offer those services. We think, in general, everyone is going to be moving towards cloud delivered, but it's, everybody's on a different time frame and it varies by technology. Cloud delivered for firewall, secure internet access or secure internet gateways that include network security and not just higher layer things like secure web gateway or mail or WAF or CASB or, sandboxes, which were evolved or came into the world late enough that a lot of the initial market was SaaS. Here we're looking at markets that relied on hardware and software deployments already, dropping to, say 25% of the total revenue for those markets in 2025. So it's happening pretty fast. And all of these vendors, looking at the same four vendors that we looked at, the revenue picture for, all of the primary vendors are preparing for this, right? They have existing solutions that address cloud, SecOps, cloud delivered, and cloud native security, whether it's, Checkpoint, Cisco, Fortinet, Palo Alto Networks, or companies that we're not even looking at here. They have existing solutions, whether internally developed or acquired. Cisco, acquired OpenDNS and now has Umbrella, cloud delivered. You have PAN with Prisma Access. Fortinet has recently got into the SASE game. Everybody's got CASB solutions. Everybody's been developing or in many cases acquiring technology in order to build out to shore up the future where the hardware firewalls aren't 80% of their revenue anymore. So if we look specifically at the acquisition front, and these may not be all of them, so don't yell at me if your favorite acquisition is missing from this list, but these are the ones that I thought were significant really since late 2017, early 2018. So you're talking 3 years, in some cases a little bit longer. The number of acquisitions specifically focused on extending security into the cloud and dealing with cloud delivered security solutions, whether it's Checkpoint, Cisco, Fortinet, or PAN. Everyone has been busy. And Pan likely has been the busiest, at least from an acquisition standpoint. You can see the sheer number of acquisitions they've made over the last 3 years that are SaaS focused. And interestingly for this, and these are in their publicly reported financials, started talking more specifically about their portfolio. And you can kind of use this as a proxy for the other vendors and what it means to adjust their businesses and their portfolios over time in order to deal with this new reality of we can't just sell hardware firewalls to everyone and call it a day anymore. So on the upper right, you can see the way Pan at least publicly reports NetSec, their network security offerings, and then Cloud and AI, which is kind of their next-gen offerings. And the NetSec also includes cloud delivered. It includes Prisma Access and Prisma SD-WAN. So it's not only old technologies, but they're roughly dividing it between NetSec and Cloud and AI. On the left-hand side, if you look at what they consider their next-gen security solutions, which is basically most of the stuff that's not network firewall, the average run rate by the end of Q3 21, which was their last reporting quarter, was almost $1 billion for the non-network security, not traditional firewall solutions. So a good chunk of their growth, their expected growth, is coming from everything but firewall. But when they just reported their earnings, you'll see that they actually increased their fiscal 2021 forecast of 5.28 to 5.3 billion. But they didn't adjust the next gen portion of the forecast. So they actually adjusted their forecast for fiscal 21 up. And with most of that up adjustment coming from their traditional product line. So even though them and everyone else has been long preparing and accelerated their preparation for a world in which their hardware firewall platforms aren't their dominant solution that they're offering, they're still increasing expectations for what that portion of their business is going to do in the near term, while then preparing long term for the changes. So to sort of wrap up, what would we recommend as a result of this to CISOs? Map out your overall strategy for security deployment. What's going to stay on-prem? What's going into private cloud? What's going into the public cloud, short and long term? What infrastructure is going to go away in exchange for SaaS? Start to frame any conversation or discussion or planning you have around cybersecurity strategy for what's going to live in our locations and what's going to be cloud native and what's going to be cloud delivered. Be realistic. I always joke. Someone will call me on this. Maybe if you know of one, let me know. There are still banks in the United States somewhere in the middle of the country, most likely, that are running on their branches are running on token ring networks. It takes a long time for the sunk investment in technology and training and people for security solutions to go away. So however excited you are about SASE or Zero Trust Access right now, maybe add 2 years to your expected complete rollout. For extending security for secure access to branch and remote office, do cost analysis. Understand the trade-offs and cost of hardware and appliance-based solutions versus cloud-delivered architectures, ZTNA, SASE, SIG. Pick a vendor who can deliver a seamless experience across all of the different deployment models, and ideally who can transition things like management consoles and even licenses back and forth between different types of deployment. So if you invest X dollars in Y vendor's firewall solution, you should be able to roll that out on-prem and then move it to a private cloud if that's where the data or the applications or infrastructure go, and then move that same investment to the public cloud if that's where you're headed, and not have to stop and start new products, new management systems, new visibility tools, new processes, new purchasing process. Anytime you need to flexibly move back and forth across those borders, because those borders are imaginary, and all the vendors should be planning for a future in which they sell you a core technology and then you deploy that wherever it makes the most sense for you, and they make it easy for you to do that. The shift away from hardware is happening because of the cloud. So how do your partners or vendors help you make that transition easier? What kind of overall migration strategy are they presenting? What kind of time frames? Are they making technology licensing portable so that you can have the same types of security everywhere? Are they making, visibility transparent across infrastructure? How easy is it for you to navigate across your owned on-prem, private cloud, and public cloud deployments to view or enforce the same policy, to trace threats across different environments? These are the kinds of things that you need to be rigorous about and hammer your vendors about, because that's what's going to make your life easier and ultimately make your infrastructure more secure long term. Is if there aren't a lot of hard stops and starts in between portions of your security infrastructure. So to wrap it up, the death of hardware and the overtaking of the world by SaaS and zero trust solutions has been declared prematurely, but there are certainly massive changes coming and already happening. Major security infrastructure vendors are in various stages of preparing for this, right? We saw the product portfolios, we saw the number of acquisitions just those 4 vendors have made. We're seeing a shift towards leading with cloud native and cloud delivered first, and then backfilling with hardware solutions or capacity upgrades as needed. And so make sure that the vendor or vendors you're choosing are on the right, part of the timeline for that transition for you. They meet you where you need them to be. And interrogate your vendors about their technology plans. Press them to remove barriers to acquiring and deploying security solutions, regardless of form factor. That should really be one of your primary concerns right now. Is I'm investing in you because I like your security technology and vision. You make our infrastructure safer. Don't make me not choose you because the process of figuring out how to deploy it at a branch office versus in AWS or GCP is hard, right? Make sure they remove that barrier for you. All right. Well, I think that's certainly the end of my prepared slides here. So a little bit of Q&A to wrap up, and I hope everybody is having a great Black Hat, and look forward to hopefully seeing people in person next year.